The Hunger Games series has a lot of families, from the Everdeens, the Abernathys, the Snows, the Hawthornes, and so many more. In the original trilogy, we didn't know much about these families, but between the two prequel novels that Suzanne Collins has written, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and the new book that just came out, Sunrise on the Reaping, we now have an insane amount of detail that we did not have previously. In this video, I'm going to break all of this down, going through each family tree in every single family, and you might be surprised about who is actually related to who. Now, this video will contain spoilers for the new book Sunrise on the Reaping, so if you haven't read it, add this video to your watch later playlist and come back after you've finished. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and sharing. It will greatly help to grow and sustain the channel. And if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button, and you can also follow me on all of my other social medias, all of which are linked down below, and all of which house similar content that I make here on this channel. Now that I've said that, let's get into the video. We'll start with the Everdeen family. At the top, we have Mr. and Mrs. Everdeen, who had Burdock Everdeen, a character that we knew of in the original series, but in Sunrise on the Reaping, we actually got to meet him and actually found out what his name was. We also discover that he was one of Hamish's best friends, and Burdock always told Hamish that he had a major crush on a woman named Astrid March. Hamish told them they could never be together though, because he was from the Seam, the poorest part of the district, and she was part of the merchant section, the richest part of the district. However, Burdock was able to get the girl of his dreams, and they got married, connecting the March family to the Everdeens. This was an arrangement that Mr. and Mrs. March weren't happy about, especially when Astrid left the merchant section to go live with Burdock in the Seam. Astrid and Burdock eventually had their first daughter, Katniss, and later they had their second daughter, Prim. Burdock ended up dying while working in the mines, leaving Astrid to raise the kids, but she just shut down, leaving Katniss to be the main provider for the family. Prim Everdeen tragically died at the end of the war, the cause being a bombing. Katniss eventually ended up with Peeta Mellark, which brings a whole other family into the mix. In the new novel, we discover that Peeta's father's name is Otho Mellark. He of course married the mother of Peeta, and she was much more aggressive to the kids than Otho was, and just more aggressive in general. On top of having Peeta, Otho and Mrs. Mellark also had two other boys who were Peeta's older brothers. Unfortunately, all of them were killed when the Capitol bombed District 12. Going back down to Peeta and Katniss, the two of them extended the Everdeens and the Mellarks by having a son, and later a little girl. Now, going back up to Burdock and his parents, his mother was related to the Baird family, the family associated with the Covey. The Covey were nomads who traveled through Panem, never really making a home anywhere. However, they were eventually found and rounded up by peacekeepers, forcing them to make permanent residence in District 12. At the top of their tree, we'll start with the three main cousins, Lucy Gray, Maud Ivory, and Barbara Azure. Lucy Gray ended up running away with Coriolanus Snow, but when they turned on each other, Coriolanus shot in every direction of the woods, most likely killing Lucy Gray, but it was sort of up in the air about what really happened to her. With the new book though, we see that Lucy Gray has a gravestone in the Covey Cemetery. Now, this could just be a symbolic grave, and her body wasn't really buried there. They might have just put it there because she was gone for so long, they assumed she was dead. However, it's also possible that the Covey really did find her body and she really was buried there. Next to Lucy Gray's gravestone was Maud Ivory's. She was Lucy Gray's cousin, and the two were very close. Now, there are several hints that Maud Ivory ended up having a daughter named Lenore Dove, who we met in Sunrise on the Reaping. For one, the timeline and the ages match up. 2, Lenore Dove's mother died in childbirth, hence why Maud Ivory is dead. And 3, the name Dove means gray, and everybody knew that this name came from a dead girl, most likely being Lucy Gray. We can speculate that Maud Ivory named her maybe daughter this to honor Lucy Gray Baird, the cousin that she was so close with. And there's much more proof that Maud Ivory really is Lenore Dove's mother. Lenore Dove wears pieces of Lucy Gray's famous rainbow dress on her clothes, which she probably would have gotten from her mother, Maud Ivory. She also knew and sang all of the songs that Lucy Gray and Maud Ivory either wrote or sang, many of which most had not heard, meaning they were passed down. And at one point in the new book, it mentions that Lenore Dove is wearing an ivory headband, which I see as a clear hint from Suzanne Collins as to who her mother is. Lenore Dove's mother was with a man that was Lenore Dove's father, who she never knew. Having never known her mother or father, she was raised by Clerk Carmine and his partner, who she called her uncles, even though they weren't actually related. I'm still going to add them to the family tree though, but with some dotted lines. And if we do this, we have to go over the fact that Clerk Carmine had a brother named Billy Top. Lenore Dove ended up being poisoned by President Snow. But again, I'm going to put a dotted line, this time for Haymitch. Because though Lenore Dove died, she and Haymitch mated for life, and probably had the most genuine relationship in the entire series. Taking a step back and looking at this tree, with Burdock and his family being related to the Bairds through blood and marriage, this connects Lucy Gray, Maud Ivory, Lenore Dove, Burdock Everdeen, Astrid March, Katniss Everdeen, Prim Everdeen, and Peeta Mellark. They are all related. That is crazy. Staying in the realm of District 12 families, let's look at the Hawthornes. Their tree starts when Hazel and Mr. Hawthorne got married. Together they had 4 kids, Gale the oldest, then 2 more boys, Rory and Vic, and a daughter named Posey. Gale's father, Mr. Hawthorne, ended up dying in the same mine explosion that Burdock died in, Katniss and Prim's father. This then made Gale be the main provider for his 3 siblings, his mom, and of course, himself. Here, we can also think about what could have been. Gale and Katniss had a few discussions about being together, and Gale even pitched that they could possibly have kids of their own. This obviously didn't work out, as Katniss went on to be with Peeta, and Gale went on to District 2 to head up a fancy job. Katniss speculates though that in his new home, he was probably with other girls, which could also lead to him marrying and starting a family. But because there's no proof of that, this is where the Hawthorne family tree ends. Next, we'll go over the Donner family, and they are a family that has been expanded on so much with Sunrise on the Reaping coming out. The tree starts with their grandmother, who we'll get back to in a minute. She had Mr. Donner, and Mr. Donner went on to marry Mrs. Donner. Together, they had twin girls named Mesa Lee and Marilee. They were one of the richest families in District 12, and were envied by those in the Seam, including Haymitch and Burdock Everdeen. The twin girls were given beautiful gold heirlooms that came from their grandmother, a pin that featured a hummingbird, which went to Marilee, and a pin that had a mockingjay on it, which went to Mesa Lee. Both of these had been made by Tam Amber, a member of the Covey. Mesa Lee ended up being reaped for the 50th Hunger Games alongside Haymitch, and in the new novel, we see the bond that these two have, even deciding to call each other brother and sister. Considering how strong their bond was and how they were basically siblings, I'm gonna add a dotted line between the two of them just for fun. Mesa Lee ended up dying in the arena, so her story ends there. As for Marilee, she married a man named Mr. Undersee, who actually went on to become the mayor of the district. Together, they had a daughter named Madge Undersee, who actually became close friends with Katniss. On Reaping Day for the 74th Hunger Games, Madge found her Aunt Mesa Lee's mockingjay pin and decided to wear it to the Reaping. When Katniss volunteered to go into the arena, Madge visited her, and she insisted that Katniss take the pin as her token to take into the arena. This pin then became the spark of the rebellion. In the movie, it was Greasy Say that gave Katniss the pin, but obviously we're going over the books. The Donner line ends here, because Marilee, Mr. Undersee, and Madge all tragically died in the bombing on 12. Now, let's look at the Abernathy family, which has been so fleshed out with the new book. We just learned that the Abernathys had a reputation of being very rebellious. This extended to Mr. Abernathy, who went on to marry a woman named Willa May. Together, they had 2 sons, Haymitch and his younger brother Sid. They also had twin girls, but sadly, they died during birth. Their father ended up dying in a mine explosion, which many believe might not have been an accident, but a punishment for all of his rebellious activity. Haymitch followed in his father's footsteps, rebelling against the Capitol, but he too was punished, as Snow killed both Willa May and Sid in a fire, as well as Lenore Dove through poisoning. As I did before, for the Abernathy family tree, I'm again going to add a dotted line connecting Haymitch and Lenore Dove. Now, moving on to the Snow family. Their tree starts with their grandmother. She had a son named Crassus Snow, who was an integral part of the series as a whole, because he helped form the idea for the Hunger Games. siblings. Crassus, along with Casca Highbottom, completed an assignment for their class taught by Dr. Gall, the goal of their assignment being to come up with the worst punishment imaginable for the districts. While drunk, they came up with the idea of sending kids into the arena to fight to the death. Though Crassus told Highbottom it was just between them, he ended up taking the assignment to Gall, which Gall then took, and when the dark days ended, she made it a reality. Crassus had a sibling who went on to marry an unknown person, and they had a daughter named Tigress. Crassus himself married a woman, and together they had Coriolanus Snow, making Coriolanus and Tigress cousins. During the Dark Days, both sets of parents died, leaving Coriolanus and Tigress orphans, who were then raised by their grandmother. Tigress never married or had kids, so the tree for her ends here. As for Coriolanus, he almost ended up with Lucy Gray, but as we went over, that ended terribly. He instead moved on to marry a woman from the capital during his rise to power, and together they had a child. Snow also sort of had adopted parents, that being the Plinths, who gave him an insane amount of money, funded his whole life, and made sure he was well taken care of. We'll add a dotted line for Strabo Plinth and his wife to be part of the Snow family, and that also connects their son Sejanus, who hauntingly was killed because of Coriolanus, which the Plinths obviously never knew. Snow's child eventually went on to marry and gave him a granddaughter who he seemed to really care for. Snow ended up dying either from choking on his own blood or being mauled to death by the crowd. With the new novel, we're also introduced to the Latier family. We met Beatty in the original series, but we didn't know much about his past. Now we know that he actually married somebody, and the two of them had a son named Ampert. Like Haymitch, Beatty was punished by Snow, and his punishment was making his son go in the arena and forcing him to be his own son's mentor just to watch him die. Ampert ended up getting devoured by squirrel mutts, leaving only his skeleton. I'm sure Beatty was heartbroken, but fortunately, he was blessed as his wife became pregnant with a little girl. Beatty once again became a father. We also have to go over the Heavensbee family. Though we hear a lot about their lineage and wealth, we don't actually know that many people part of the family. Throughout the halls of their giant mansion, there are loads of pictures of different members of the family, but none of them were ever named besides Trajan Heavensbee. Then the only other Heavensbee that we know of is Plutarch, who is Trajan's great and possibly more great's grandson. Then there are two other families that are small, but I'm going to go over because they do have ancestry. First, there is the Flickerman family, which only shows Lucky Flickerman, and who is most likely his son or nephew, Caesar Flickerman, who took on the job that Lucky had. And finally, we have the Odair family. Finnick and Annie get married, and together they have a son. Finnick tragically died before he even knew Annie was pregnant though, but Annie raised their son, which kept Finnick's legacy alive. So that is every family tree in the Hunger Games that we know of so far. I've made and am still making a bunch of videos on the Sunrise on the Reaping, including a massive video going over the entire life of Haymitch Abernathy. I think it might actually be the biggest video I have ever made. So make sure you look out for that, because I know you guys are going to enjoy it. That's all for today though. Thank you so much for watching.